Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into, well, a really fascinating and, let's be honest, often brutal collection of materials, all built around the strategic pursuit of power. We're focusing specifically on the principles from Robert Greene's very well-known text, The 48 Laws of Power. You probably heard of it. Now, the sources we've looked at, they treat these laws less like moral advice and more like practical observations from history. Principles they see as pretty much immutable and absolute. They basically argue these laws dictate success or failure in high-stakes situations, regardless of the ethics involved. So our mission for you, the listener, is purely analytical here. We're not endorsing this stuff. We're here to pull out the most potent, often the most counterintuitive insights, the ones backed by historical examples. The goal is just to get you quickly up to speed on the playbook that, well, history's most effective and sometimes most ruthless players seem to have used. We're just studying the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, and what's really striking from the get-go is how the source material anchors everything in this really fundamental human feeling. That powerlessness is just intolerable. Nobody wants less power. The whole underlying idea is that everyone's driven to get more influence because, while lacking it, makes you vulnerable, makes you miserable. And this immediately sets up the core tension we need to look at, right? Society today expects you to appear, impeccably decent and honest. But according to these sources, to get real effective power, you need to master nuance. You need to seem sympathetic, connect with people, sure, but underneath, you need to be incredibly skilled, maybe even pretty cunning. We're looking at the strategic mechanics of influence that often have to work sort of beneath the surface of what looks like normal social decency.
Exactly. It's like navigating a world where being completely open is often seen as a weakness. And we're just being honest without thinking can attract vengeances from people you might accidentally offend or make feel threatened. So appearing totally transparent can actually be, paradoxically, a really carefully crafted strategy in itself.
So today we're going to dig into 5 main themes, pulling directly from the laws and how they've played out historically. We'll start by tackling the relationships closest to you, your friends, your bosses. We'll look at why, according to Greene, loyalty can be misplaced, why silence isn't just golden, it's a weapon, and how the real masters craft this external image that's both untouchable and deeply alluring, even if the reality behind it is, well, less impressive.
Right. Let's kick off at the top. One of the most famous or maybe infamous laws. It deals with those vertical dynamics, your relationship with your superior, your boss. This is where apparently doing too well can backfire immediately.
Yeah, the core idea is brutally simple. People above you must always feel superior, always.
Right.
So when you're trying to impress them, which is natural, you absolutely cannot let your own talents or your smarts make them feel overshadowed or insecure.
It sounds straightforward, but it must be a constant balancing act. The sources really hammer this home. If you make your master look bad, even unintentionally, you're attacking their authority. And their authority, maybe even more than their actual skill, is built on perception, on ego. It's fragile. You have to anticipate that immediate, maybe unconscious envy your talent might spark.
Yeah.
Surpassing the master is called out as like the single worst mistake you can make in power circles.
Right. So the strategy isn't about competing openly. It's more about sophisticated perception management, almost an art form, just showering them with praise, that obvious flattery. It has limits, it's clumsy, often backfires. A more discreet approach works much better. If you genuinely are smarter, the advice is to pretend you're not.
Seriously, how does that work? Do you have to literally play dumb?
Not exactly dumb, more naive. You play the role of the perpetual student. You constantly defer to their experience, their seniority. Maybe you even make small, unimportant mistakes, so you have to ask for their help. That confirms their role as the wise mentor, right? Masters, the sources say, love being asked for help. It validates their position. But the real high-level play here is attribution. If you have a brilliant idea, you publicly give them the credit. Frame your input as just, building on their underlying wisdom.
Oh, okay. And the perfect historical example of this kind of strategic humility is apparently Galileo and his relationship with the Medici family.
Absolutely. Galileo was a scientist, right? He depended on the Medici for funding. His discoveries were huge, revolutionary. They could have easily made his patrons feel small, like they were just the money guys for his genius. But instead, when he discovered the moons of Jupiter, a massive deal, he didn't just announce his brilliance, he named them the Medicean stars.
Yeah.
He literally compared the family to the stars themselves.
Wow. That's not just flattery, that's cosmic level praise.
Exactly. He wasn't boosting their intellect, he was boosting their status in the universe. So yes, he got personal glory, but he made sure the master looked more brilliant, more historically significant than all the rival courts in Italy. And that's the key insight, you see. Don't outshine the master. Use your achievements to make the master outshine everyone else. You provide the spotlight, they stand in it.
But the sources do mention an exception, right? Like, when does this rule flip? When is it okay or even necessary to let your own light shine brighter?
Well, if your superior is genuinely weak, what the source calls a moribund star, already fading fast, then their decline is pretty much inevitable. In that case, the advice shifts. There's nothing really to fear. If they're already on the way out, you can discreetly speed things up a bit, make yourself look more competent, more charming, more effective in key moments. But, and this is but there's a warning attached. Never deliver the final blow yourself. Don't be the one seen finishing off a weakened leader. That looks cruel, makes you look bad. You wait for their power to just fade naturally. You survive, you rise, but you don't get the blood of their downfall on your hands. #2. The danger of friendship versus the utility of enemies. Law 2.
Okay, so shifting from the boss-employee thing to the horizontal relationships, we hit Law 2, which is, man, this one's really counterintuitive. Beware of your friends. Why is relying on friendship seen as so dangerous when you're trying to gain power?
Well, according to Greene, friends are dangerous for a couple of main reasons. First, they're the ones most likely to betray you out of envy. Why? Because they know you best. They know your secrets, your insecurities. And their betrayal, if it comes, will likely be driven by emotion, by passion, not cold calculation. Second, friends can get spoiled. They can become tyrannical in their own way. They might forget where their good fortune or influence came from, especially if it came from you. They get complacent, take your support for granted, and maybe start feeling entitled to more.
So the source flat out says you have more to fear from your friends than from your enemies. That just goes against every instinct.
Right.
We want to build alliances with people we trust. So why then are former enemies potentially better allies?
The advantage of an enemy, supposedly, is that they are always on notice. An old enemy, if you bring them into your camp, has to constantly prove their loyalty. They can't take your favor for granted because the past, that history of conflict, is always there. Their loyalty isn't based on warm feelings. It's earned through, necessary vigilance, maybe even a little fear. Whereas a friend's loyalty is just assumed. And that assumption, that's what breeds the complacency and potentially the ambition that leads to betrayal. The implication is pretty chilling. If you don't have any useful enemies, maybe you need to make one.
But wouldn't the constant effort of managing a former enemy, always watching your back, be way more draining than just cultivating reliable friendships? Where's the line between being strategically aware and just being paranoid?
The sources seem to suggest that in the power game, maybe paranoia is just heightened awareness. The vigilance you need with an enemy is external. It's professional. You watch what they do, their actions. The danger from a friend is internal. It's emotional. They're already inside your defenses in the room you thought was safe. You can't really be truly vigilant around a friend without destroying the friendship itself. So you're constantly managing this emotional risk. With an enemy, the risk is known. It's out in the open. It's almost transactional.
And the story of Emperor Michel and his friend Basil is like the perfect tragic example of this. Trusting emotion over calculation.
Oh, absolutely. Emperor Michel needed someone loyal, so he picked his friend Basil, a guy who owed him everything. He made him Grand Chamberlain, top advisor. Michel just showered him with wealth, influence, even married him off to one of his own mistresses, treated him like a brother. It was all based on that emotional bond, that shared history.
And because of that bond, he didn't see the danger growing right next to him.
Exactly. Years down the line, Michel hits financial trouble. He needs Basil to repay some of the money he'd been given, and Basil refuses, just flat out refuses.
Yeah.
Michel realized way too late that by loading his friend up with gifts and power, he'd basically enabled Basil to build his own base, more money, more allies in the army, more actual power than the emperor himself. The loyal friend, driven by his own ambition, maybe feeling entitled, eventually just turned on Michel and seized the empire. It's a stark lesson in how emotional trust can blind you to a threat growing in plain sight.
Okay, moving on. Power isn't just about raw strength or clever moves. It's hugely about what people think you have, what they perceive. So these next laws are all about crafting your external image, your reputation, your mystique. #3. Reputation is the cornerstone of power. Law 5.
Right. Law 5 calls reputation the cornerstone of power. If you build an impeccable reputation, it kind of acts like a shield or even a weapon before any conflict starts. People hesitate to challenge someone whose standing seems unshakable. But the flip side is, if your reputation gets damaged, you become vulnerable. Suddenly, everyone feels like they can take a shot at you.
So step one is constant defense of your own reputation.
Okay.
Got it. But the really interesting part, the more cynical part, is the offensive strategy. How to destroy your enemies by attacking their reputation, not them directly.
Yeah, the mechanism described is, well, it's effective. You create an opening, maybe spread a damaging rumor, expose a small flaw, something like that. And then you step back, you stay quiet, you let the pack do the rest.
Why does silence work here? Because once a reputation starts to crack, society often takes over. People naturally distance themselves from someone who looks tainted. They worry it'll rub off on them. Your silence lets others do the dirty work while you look clean. This brings us straight to P.T. Barnum. The ultimate showman, right? He seemed to understand that notoriety itself, even negative notoriety, could be a source of immense power. Controversy keeps people talking.
Barnum was a genius at controlling attention. He figured out early on that scandal wasn't necessarily bad for business, it was essential. He actively cultivated this image of being a bit of a charlatan, a huckster. He understood it was far better to be attacked or talked about, even negatively, than to be ignored. Obscurity, that's the real enemy of power.
So controversy, as long as you're the center of it, becomes a tool. It means you're setting the agenda, dictating the conversation, even if the conversation is critical.
Absolutely. There's that great anecdote about his early boss, Turner, who deliberately started a false, damaging rumor about Barnum. When Barnum confronted him, Turner just laughed and said something like, "Look, all we need to succeed is notoriety." For public figures, being talked about is the currency. Deny your enemies the power to make you irrelevant. Barnum's whole approach was to welcome the fight, maybe even provoke it, just to make sure his name was the one everyone knew. #4. The allure of mystique and spectacle. Law 27.
It leads perfectly into Law 27, the power of creating a following, almost like a cult. Humans have this deep need to believe in something bigger, especially maybe when traditional religion or grand causes are fading. If you can offer them that cause, that new faith, you become the focus of all that yearning.
This is where strategy gets really theatrical. To build that mystique, the advice is keep your words vague but full of promises. Focus on generating enthusiasm, drama, atmosphere not cold, hard rationality. An aura of mystery can make someone seem profound, even brilliant, because the audience projects their own hopes onto you. They fill in the blanks.
And the classic case study for this is Mata Hari.
Right. By most accounts, she wasn't exceptionally intelligent or even uniquely beautiful. But she cultivated this incredible mystique around her dancing. People saw it as something divinely inspired, exotic, otherworldly. Her power came entirely from the mystery she built about her origins, her secret knowledge. She never explained, she just performed the fantasy. And then, by giving followers rituals to perform or asking for sacrifices, could be money, time, emotional commitment, you anchor their belief system directly to you.
Let's talk about Dr. Mesmer, too. He seemed to master the spectacle part, even if the science wasn't quite there. It shows how powerful theater can be, right? Maybe more powerful than facts sometimes.
Mesmer was all about the showmanship. He knew that the right atmosphere, the drama, could bypass people's logical minds. He used weird lighting, silver light, apparently strange music, assistants who looked imposing, elaborate rituals like holding metal rods or sitting in special tubs. All this theater created intense belief in his patients. They believed he had some kind of supernatural power, and that belief triggered self-suggestion, leading them to feel cured. His power wasn't in medicine, it was in manipulating their desire for a miracle. He tapped into emotion, not reason. #5, displaying flaws to disarm envy.
Okay, now for a really subtle psychological move. We've heard it's dangerous to seem better than everyone, but apparently seeming absolutely flawless is even worse. Why? Because perfection breeds silent envy, creates hidden enemies just waiting for you to slip up.
So the strategy here is to consciously, wisely exhibit some defect, or maybe admit to small, inconsequential vices now and then. It acts like a psychological lightning rod for envy. It makes you seem more human, more relatable. It gives the envious people something to latch onto that isn't your core strength or success.
So you're basically throwing them a small bone, letting them feel superior in some minor way so they don't attack your major strengths. Explain that a bit more. Why does admitting a small flaw work better than just trying to hide everything?
Well, think about it. When someone seems utterly perfect, it can feel like a personal affront to others. It highlights their own perceived shortcomings. But if you introduce a small flaw, maybe you're brilliant but notoriously disorganized, or powerful but have a slightly embarrassing hobby, you give people an out.
Mm.
They can feel slightly superior to you in that one little area. Okay, he's successful, but look at his terrible taste in ties. Or she runs the company, but she can't parallel park. That little crack lets the pressure of their envy escape harmlessly.
It makes you seem less threatening, more like you're playing the same human game as them, even if you're clearly winning overall.
Precisely. You sacrifice a minor point of social perfection to protect the much bigger reality of your power. The source is stress, only the dead and the gods can afford to be perfect. For living, breathing people in the power game, a bit of calculated, self-aware imperfection is actually a form of camouflage. It diverts the negative attention that could otherwise bring you down.
Right. If managing perception is key on the outside, then controlling the information you release is vital for protecting yourself. These next laws focus on keeping your cards close to your chest, staying unpredictable. Hashtag tag 6. Dissimulating intentions. Law 3.
Law 3 is all about keeping people guessing. Never reveal the true purpose behind your actions. If your rivals or even your allies don't know what you're really aiming for, they can't prepare a defense. They can't block you.
You have to create what the sources call a screen of smoke. Guide people down a false path, maybe one that seems plausible or comforting to them. Wrap them up in this smoke so by the time they figure out your real objective, you're already making your move and it's too late for them to stop you. Deception requires this cover.
And the classic example of this, requiring that kind of ice-cold poker face, is Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck. Fierce Prussian nationalist, right? He desperately wanted war with Austria to unify Germany under Prussia. His military buildup was obvious. War fever was rising. Then suddenly, he completely wrong-foots everyone. He gives this incredibly dramatic speech in Parliament, pleading for peace, praising Austria, warning about the terrible costs of war.
Total misdirection.
Yeah.
So how did that act as a screen of smoke? What did it achieve?
It created chaos and confusion among his opponents. Think about it. If Bismarck, the main guy pushing for war, is suddenly talking peace and defending the enemy, what does that even mean? His rivals domestically were thrown off balance. They couldn't figure out his game, which made them hesitate, unable to unite against him. And crucially, it probably lulled Austria into a false sense of security. By the time everyone realized the speech was just pure theater, designed to confuse and disarm, Bismarck had finished his preparations and was ready to strike. He didn't just hide his goal, he broadcast the exact opposite, making the eventual attack even more shocking and effective. Hashtag tag 7. Say always less than necessary. Law 4.
And related to hiding intentions is just controlling your words. Law 4. Say less than necessary. The idea is the more you babble, the more ordinary you seem, the less control you appear to have. And crucially, the more likely you are to accidentally reveal something useful to others.
Yeah, the power of silence is huge here. When you're quiet, it makes people around you uneasy. Humans are wired to interpret, right? We need to know what others are thinking to feel secure. If you only give out information in tiny bits or not at all, people can't get a read on your intentions. This uncertainty often makes them talk more, trying to fill the void, trying to draw you out. And in doing so, they often end up revealing valuable things about themselves, their own plans, their own weaknesses.
This is often linked to Louis XIV, the Sun King. His royal silence was apparently a big part of his power.
Absolutely. His silence was a strategic tool. The memoirist Saint-Simon wrote something like, Louis XIV never sold his words, his very smile, or even his glances better, meaning because he communicated so little, every word, every gesture became incredibly valuable, carried immense weight. Being brief, even silent, makes you seem more profound, more in control. Your lack of easy answers unnerves people and makes the few words you do offer seem precious.
Okay, but I have to push back a bit here. In today's world, with social media, 24/7 news, constant demands for transparency, doesn't silence just look like you're hiding something? Or worse, that you're incompetent or out of touch? How does royal silence work when everyone expects an instant comment?
That is the modern challenge, absolutely. The law isn't necessarily about being completely mute all the time. It's more about controlling the signal-to-noise ratio. It's about avoiding meaningless chatter that diminishes your power. So a modern take might be, when a crisis hits, maybe you issue one clear, definitive, high-level statement, and then you go back to strategic silence. You don't get drawn into the endless back and forth, the constant commentary cycle that the media or your rivals crave. You use the burst of attention your statement generates, but then you deny them access to your ongoing thought process. You control the tempo.
And we have a really chilling, quite brutal example of what happens when this law is ignored. When someone talks too much at the worst possible moment, the execution of Kondraty Ryleyev in 1825.
Oh, this is such a stark cautionary tale. Vanity destroying someone who literally got a second chance at life. Ryleyev was a leader of the Decembrist revolt, condemned to hang. During the execution, the rope broke. He fell, but he was alive. Now, back then, that was often seen as a sign from God, divine intervention. It could lead to a pardon. Ryleyev, probably massively relieved, thinking he was safe, couldn't resist a boast. He apparently shouted to the crowd something like, "You see, in Russia, they can't even make a decent rope."
Oh no. Mocking the state right after escaping death by its incompetence. Fatal mistake.
Absolutely fatal. Someone reported his words directly to Tsar Nicholas I. The Tsar was reportedly furious, not just at the incompetence, but at the condemned man's arrogance in mocking the state at that moment. He immediately ordered them to find a stronger rope and proceed with the execution. Ryleyev was hanged again, successfully this time, moments later. The lesson is brutal and clear. The more you talk, the greater the risk you'll say something foolish, something damaging, or something that provokes an irreversible, fatal reaction. Silence, in his case, would literally have saved his life.
Okay, moving beyond just concealment, real power, according to these sources, also means mastering time itself, knowing when to pull back, when to wait patiently, and sometimes when to completely change who you seem to be. #8. Capitulate in time to transform defeat into power. Law 22.
Law 22 is incredibly pragmatic, maybe even cold-blooded. It tells you to view defeat not as the end, not as a matter of honor you have to fight to the death over, but as a potential strategic tool when you're clearly losing. Surrender. Don't fight a hopeless battle just for honor's sake. Capitulation buys you time. Time to recover, time to subtly annoy and undermine the victor, time to wait for their power to inevitably weaken or for circumstances to change. You turn surrender itself into a form of resistance, a tool of power.
So losing a battle doesn't mean you've lost the war. It's just a tactical retreat that preserves your strength for later. The source uses the amazing example of Japan facing the West in the 19th century.
Yeah, it's a brilliant case study. Japan was facing these overwhelming Western powers, Europe, America, with superior technology and military might. They realized that direct military resistance would mean total destruction, colonization. So instead, they adopted this incredibly clever, low-key strategy. One advisor basically said, "We need to copy foreigners and what they have best, and thus compensate for our own weaknesses."
So they outwardly just gave in. They adopted Western dress, technology, business practices. They socially and commercially capitulated while secretly preserving their own culture and strengthening their internal power structure.
Exactly. And it was genius because the Western powers saw the superficial adoption of their ways and thought, they're weak, they're admitting defeat, they're becoming like us. They saw Japan as inferior, easily managed, so they didn't take precautions. This gave Japan the breathing room to use the West's own tools, industrialization, modern military ideas, economic strategies to rapidly catch up, and eventually, in many areas, surpass them, all without fighting a devastating war they would have lost. It was like a slow, quiet invasion disguised as submission. The enemy couldn't even see it happening. #9, master the art of timing. Law 35.
Law 35 is about pace. Never appear to be in a hurry. Patience isn't just a virtue, it's a strategic necessity. It lets you wait for the perfect moment, or sometimes even actively create that moment. The source actually breaks down timing into 3 different types.
Right. First, there's what it calls long time. This is about endurance, having the patience to wait for big, slow-moving trends or power shifts to play out. Things that are maybe inevitable but take years. The classic example given is Tokugawa Ieyasu in feudal Japan. He waited patiently for ages while his more powerful rival Hideyoshi was in charge. He just waited until Hideyoshi made a huge, fatal mistake, launching that disastrous invasion of Korea. That blunder weakened Hideyoshi enough for Tokugawa to finally make his move and take control, becoming shogun. He trusted that time and other people's mistakes would eventually create his opportunity.
Okay, long time. What's the second type?
Second is forced time. This is more aggressive. It's about setting the pace yourself, forcing your opponent to rush, to react to your tempo, making them exhaust themselves chasing you or trying to keep up. The Russo-Japanese War example with Admiral Togo is perfect here. Togo knew the Russian Baltic fleet had to sail halfway around the world to reach him. He basically goaded them into coming, then used misinformation to make them think the Japanese fleet was everywhere, forcing the Russians to stay on high alert the entire journey. They burned through coal, supplies, and nerves. By the time they finally arrived in the Pacific, they were exhausted, stressed, and disorganized. Togo achieved an easy, decisive victory, partly because he had forced them to operate on his rushed, draining timetable.
And the third type of timing.
That's the end. This is about recognizing the critical moment. Knowing precisely when conditions are finally perfect to strike quickly, decisively, with maximum impact. All the waiting, all the maneuvering leads up to this. The Roman general Sertorius apparently used a great visual analogy for this. He showed his soldiers a strong man failing to pull the tail off a horse all at once, versus a weaker man succeeding by patiently pulling out the hairs one by one. His point was, patience has much more power than force, until the final moment. Then, speed and decisiveness are everything. Hashtag 10, know when to stop, Law 47, and be fluid, Law 48.
Which brings us to Law 47, a crucial warning. The moment of victory is the time of greatest peril. Winning can make you overconfident, right? Get that victory disease. It pushes you to go too far, beyond your original goal, creating new enemies, stretching your resources too thin.
Absolutely. You have to set a clear goal beforehand, and the moment you achieve it, you stop. You consolidate. You resist the urge to push further just because you can. Cyrus the Great is the historical cautionary tale here. He won so many victories, he got blinded by success, ignored warnings, pushed his luck too far, invading the territory of the Massagetae, and ended up getting killed, which destabilized his whole empire. He didn't know when to quit while he was ahead.
And there's that subtler example, too. The Spartans, after they finally beat Athens in the Peloponnesian War, they won the military victory, crushed the Athenian system they despised. But then Athenian wealth, Athenian culture, the very things they defeated slowly infiltrated and corrupted the rigid Spartan system from within. Their discipline eroded. In the long run, the defeated culture arguably conquered the victors. They won the battle but lost the peace because they couldn't adapt or stop the infection.
Which leads perfectly into the final law in this section, Law 48. Be formless. Be fluid, like water. Having a rigid, fixed plan makes you predictable, makes you a target. You need to be adaptable, mobile, except that nothing is permanent. Never count on stability. Always be ready to change shape.
It's like taking the shape of whatever container you find yourself in instead of trying to force the container to fit your shape. The example used is James Rothschild in 19th century France. That era was incredibly turbulent. Napoleon falls, a monarchy comes back, then republics, then another empire, constant upheaval.
And Rothschild survived, even thrived through all of it. How? By adapting to every single regime. He wasn't tied to any specific political ideology or faction. His power was his wealth, and his willingness to use it flexibly to work with whoever was in charge. He remained fluid and elusive. He demonstrated that the best defense against chaos is to never expect stability in the first place. His lack of a fixed identity made him basically indestructible by political change.
All right, now we get into the really deep stuff, the advanced psychological game. Exploiting individual weaknesses using subtle mental tricks. This is where it feels like you need to be part spy, part psychologist. Hashtag Neil 11. Finding the Achilles heel. Law 33.
Law 33 is based on a simple premise. Everyone has a weak spot. Not necessarily a big, obvious flaw, but some crack in their armor. Maybe an insecurity they try to hide, an emotion they can't control, a desperate need for something, validation, maybe, or even a secret pleasure, a péché mignon, a little hidden vice. This weakness, whatever it is their Achilles heel. And the law says once you find it, you can use it. These vulnerabilities often bypass a person's logical defenses.
And finding it requires serious intelligence gathering. You have to become a spy, basically, as Law 14 suggests. Dig deep to understand what truly motivates or scares someone. The story of the art dealer Joseph Duveen going after Andrew Mellon is, wow, it's intense.
Duveen was obsessed. He knew a guy like Mellon, a super rich industrialist, wouldn't be swayed just by a pretty painting or a good price. Mellon was his white whale. So Duveen apparently went to extraordinary lengths, bribing Mellon's staff, his valets, everyone, until he knew Mellon's habits, tastes, secret desires, even his insecurities, better than Mellon's own wife did. Armed with this deep psychological profile, Duveen didn't just sell art. He sold Mellon's status, historical importance, a feeling of aristocratic legitimacy that Mellon craved. He tailored the pitch perfectly to Mellon's specific Achilles heel, and Mellon became his biggest, most loyal client.
It sounds incredibly calculating, almost predatory. But the point is, you can't hit a target you haven't precisely identified.
Exactly, and it's not always about massive, complex schemes. Look at the con artist Joseph Weil, the Yellow Kid. He apparently used a tiny, seemingly insignificant detail, a bottle of cologne, to close a big deal with a hesitant banker.
Right, the April Violet story.
Yeah. Weil was trying to land this banker who was skeptical. So Weil shifted his attention slightly, focusing on the banker's wife. She happened to admire the rare French cologne Weil was wearing, while then casually, falsely, claimed it was custom-made just for him in Paris, implying, extreme wealth, exclusivity. This tiny bit of flattery aimed at the wife's taste, plus the subtle performance of elite status, completely charmed the wife. And through her, it disarmed the banker. The deal went through, apparently helped along by this tiny, targeted appeal to vanity and exclusivity, bypassing all the bankers' irrational financial objections. Hashtag 12. The strategy of limited choice. The forced hand.
Okay, this last strategy gets into some deep psychology. The idea that people actually fear having too much freedom. We prefer limited choices. Feels safer, more manageable. And a clever operator can exploit this by offering rigged options, making it seem like the other person is choosing freely when in fact you're forcing their hand.
The illusion of choice is powerful. People want to believe they're in control, that the playing field is level. This resistance to seeing how constrained their options really are creates an opening for manipulation. You essentially make them complicit in their own limitation.
Ivan the Terrible apparently used this brilliantly to get absolute power over the Russian nobles, the boyars who were resisting him.
Yes. Instead of fighting them head-on, which could have meant civil war, Ivan did something unexpected. He pretended to abdicate. He just packed up and left Moscow, went to a retreat. This threw the country into chaos. The ordinary people, terrified of anarchy without a Tsar, basically panicked. They went and begged Ivan to come back. Ivan reluctantly agreed, but on one condition, that he be given absolute unquestioned power to deal with his enemies, meaning the boyars. By framing the choices, me, your czar, with total power, or complete chaos and collapse, he forced their hand. The people, desperate for order, effectively endorsed his grab for authoritarian control.
Wow. And the art dealer Ambroise Vollard used a similar kind of forcing the hand technique with indecisive buyers, especially for artists like Cézanne, back when he wasn't yet famous.
Vollard was a master of creating urgency by reducing options. When a potential buyer was interested but hesitant about a Cézanne, Vollard would show them the best ones he had. But then, he'd refuse to name a price immediately, maybe tell them to think about it. When the customer inevitably came back, Vollard would casually show them slightly lesser quality paintings by Cézanne. If they hesitated again and came back a third time, he'd show them even worse ones. The customer would quickly realize, wait a minute, the paintings are getting worse. That first one I saw was actually the best deal. Driven by the fear of missing out, the fear of diminishing options, they'd rush back and buy the original painting they initially hesitated over. Vollard manufactured scarcity and fear of loss to close the sale. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, so we have covered a lot of ground there, an intense journey through these power strategies. We went from managing those close relationships, never upstaging the boss, maybe trusting an enemy more than a friend, all the way to mastering reputation, the strategic use of silence, perfect timing, and then into the really deep end with psychological manipulation, finding that hidden weakness, forcing people's choices without them realizing it. The common thread through all of this, seen in figures from Machiavelli and Louis XIV right up to Bismarck and Barnum, seems to be this absolute need for awareness, for emotional distance, and a kind of ruthless refusal to be swayed just by feelings or what's considered normal morality. It really is painted as a game of cold calculation.
Yeah, and for you, the listener, grappling with this material, these laws offer a pretty powerful, if unsettling, framework for analyzing human behavior, especially in high-stakes situations. Whether you're prepping for a negotiation or just watching politics play out on the world stage, they suggest that while the scenery changes technology, culture, the basic human drivers underneath, things like insecurity, envy, ambition, that deep fear of chaos, those remain pretty constant. The game might look different, but the underlying rules, Greene argues, stay the same.
What really jumps out at me is how often the most effective strategies seem to involve doing the exact opposite of what feels natural or socially acceptable. Like giving up honor when you lose, trusting an enemy, deliberately creating confusion instead of clarity.
That really is the heart of it, isn't it? The source materials portray power as this constant, incredibly complex game that often requires you to actively suppress your warmer, more natural instincts. Things like compassion, openness, maybe even basic trust. We even saw that idea that the only person who truly escapes this relentless game is the one who chooses total isolation. Playing the game seems to demand constant vigilance, constant calculation, both internally and externally. Which brings us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you to chew on. Considering the relentless effort, the calculated cruelty sometimes involved, the emotional distance that seems necessary according to these laws, what is the true cost of the kind of power they describe? Is the freedom from the game, that peace you might find in stepping away, actually more valuable than winning control within it? Something to ponder long after this deep dive is over.